The sky went silent. No radar. No comms. Just Captain Rebecca Collins, her grandfather's dog tags, and 3 enemy bombers turning toward home. The ready room was warm and stale, smelling of old coffee and boot polish. Captain Rebecca Collins took a slow sip from her chipped mug, watching the steam curl into the air. Across the scuffed table, Major Dave Miller laid down his cards with a soft thump. "Read M and weep, Collins." "Full house," he said, a grin tugging at his mustache. Becky tossed her cards onto the pile. "Your luck's unnatural, Dave. Skill, not luck. You fly like an angel, but play cards like my grandmother." The air raid siren tore through the building, a deafening wail that killed all conversation. Coffee sloshed over Becky's hand as she stood up, the hot liquid soaking into her flight suit sleeve. No one spoke. They just moved. Chairs scraped against linoleum as they sprinted out into the hangar, the sudden Alaskan cold hitting them like a physical blow. Their boots echoed in the vast space as they ran toward their F-15, the gray jet waiting like a sleeping predator. Sergeant Marcus Jones stood by the ladder, clipboard in hand. "2 bears, Captain. Just poking the fence." "Same old song," Becky said, pulling on her helmet. Dave was already climbing into the back seat. "Let's go sing along." Becky hauled herself into the cockpit, her hands moving automatically through the startup sequence. The engines whined, then roared to life, the vibrations settling deep in her bones. Through the canopy, she saw Jones give the fuselage a solid pat. "Bring her back clean, Captain," he said, his voice barely audible over the jet scream. Becky gave him a thumbs up and sealed the canopy. The world outside became muted thunder. "Ready back here," Dave's voice crackled in her headset. She pushed the throttles forward and felt the jet eager to fly. The control tower's calm voice guided them onto the runway. Then every screen in the cockpit flickered and died. The tower's voice dissolved into harsh, meaningless static. The world went dark. One moment, the cockpit was alive with glowing screens and data. The next, everything died. The heads-up display flickered and vanished. The multifunction screens flashed a chaotic jumble of red errors before shutting down completely. The steady hum of electronics was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the wind rushing past the canopy. Becky's hands flew across the panels, flipping switches, hitting reset buttons. Nothing responded. "Dave? Talk to me. What's going on back there?" "Everything's dead," his voice came back tight-strained. "Radar's gone. Data links down. It's all offline." A beat of silence, then, "Tower, Old Crow 2, comm check. Do you copy?" Only harsh, grating static answered. Becky's eyes darted outside. The sky was an empty gray sheet. The ground below was a featureless white expanse. Without their systems, they were utterly alone. A cold knot tightened in her stomach, separate from the Arctic chill seeping into the cockpit. "Had to be that solar flare they warned us about," Dave said, his voice tighter now. "Guess it wasn't just a drill." Becky took a slow breath, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Okay, no panic. We're still flying." She scanned the few analog backups, altitude, airspeed, compass. The bare essentials. "We're still a plane." She heard rustling from the back seat. "Hang on," Dave muttered. A moment later, he let out a short, grim laugh. "Would you look at that? My pop's old magnetic compass. Still works." "A compass?" "Dave, we're in a 4th-gen fighter." "You got a better idea?" he shot back. She heard the rustle of paper unfolding. "Got a map, too. Time to do this the old-fashioned way." Becky banked the jet gently, relying on instinct and the basic instruments. Then, movement caught her eye. Far below, 2 distinct shapes broke the monotony of the white. The bears. But as she watched, a third, darker shadow detached itself from the cloud layer beneath them, flying fast and low. Becky's eyes strained against the endless gray. The Tu-95 bears were easy to spot now, their 4 contrails scratching white lines across the sky. They flew slow and heavy, like bumbling freight trains. She nudged the stick, guiding Old Crow 2 into a gentle intercept approach, the familiar routine calming her nerves. All right, Dave. Visual on the bears. Let's get in close, say hello, and encourage them to turn their day around. Roger that. Still nothing on comms. They're probably laughing at us, Dave's voice replied from the back. As they closed the distance, something else caught her eye. A flicker of movement far below, a shadow detaching from the thick cloud layer. It was smaller, sleeker, and moving with a purpose the bears lacked. It climbed fast, a shark rising from the depths. Becky's blood went cold. Dave. Look low. 3 o'clock. Tell me I'm seeing things. She heard him shift in his seat. A long silence followed, then a low whistle. You're not seeing things. That's a blackjack. 160. What's he doing playing tag with these old bears? The new jet, painted a menacing dark gray, slid into formation with the 2 prop-driven bombers. It was like a wolf joining a pack of sheep. Its modern lines and powerful engines were utterly out of place. This isn't a poke, Becky said, her voice tight. This is a play. The bears are the distraction. He's the main event. The 160 was flying a penetration profile, low and fast, aiming to slip under their notice, while they were busy with the noisier, more obvious threat. He's heading for the line, Becky, Dave said, all trace of humor gone from his voice. He's not here to sniff the fence. He's here to jump it. The routine was over. The game had changed. Becky pushed the throttles, her jet surging forward. She angled toward the blackjack, positioning herself between it and the border. It was time to have a conversation. One he couldn't ignore. Becky pushed the throttles, the F-15 surging forward to cut off the blackjack's path. She slid her jet alongside the massive bomber, close enough to see the rivets on its dark gray skin and the startled face of the co-pilot in his canopy. The 160 was huge, a flying fortress, but it was slow and cumbersome compared to her Eagle. She held up her left hand, fingers clear against the cockpit glass, and made a sharp, slicing motion across her throat, the universal signal to shut it down. Then she pointed emphatically away, back toward international airspace. For a moment, nothing. Then the Russian pilot shook his head, a slow, deliberate gesture. A faint smirk was visible beneath his oxygen mask. One of the larger bears drifted closer, its massive propellers churning the air, trying to crowd her out. They're not taking the hint, Dave said, his voice calm but tense. Let's see if they're listening, Becky replied. She keyed the radio, though she knew it was useless. Unidentified aircraft, you are approaching United States airspace. Turn immediately to course 090. Acknowledge. Static hissed back at her. Then, a new sound cut through, a sharp, electronic screech that made her wince. It stabbed into her headset, loud and painful. Jamming us, Dave grunted. They just killed the last working frequency. We're deaf and mute. The blackjack held its course. The pilot raised his own hand, not to signal, but to give a mocking, slow wave goodbye. Becky's jaw tightened. She edged her fighter even closer, her wingtip feeling the buffeting turbulence from the bomber's wake. The whole jet shuddered in protest. All right, she muttered, more to herself than to Dave. No more talking. She pulled back slightly, her mind racing. They were out of options. The blackjack was minutes from the line. Then, from the back seat, Dave's voice cut through her concentration. I've got an idea. You're gonna hate it. Becky's knuckles were white on the stick. The blackjack held its course, a dark arrow aimed at the heart of sovereign airspace. The 2 bears flanked it like bulky escorts. Her eyes scanned the dead panels, searching for an option that didn't exist. No weapons. No comms. Just a fuel gauge that was steadily dropping. We're out of time, Dave. He's not turning. Her voice was flat, the frustration a cold weight in her gut. A long silence from the back seat. Then, Dave cleared his throat. I've got an idea. You're gonna think I've lost my mind. At this point, I'll take crazy over nothing. My grandfather flew B-17s over the Plosti oil fields. His voice took on a distant, storytelling tone, a weird calm in the chaos. He told me, the German fighters, the 109s, they'd come in so close their prop wash would shake the bombers like a dog with a rat. Couldn't hold formation. Couldn't aim. Just rattled their teeth until they broke. Becky stared at the massive bomber filling her canopy. The Tu-160 was 100 times more advanced than an old B-17, but the laws of physics hadn't changed. You're not suggesting. Their jet's bigger. Their wake is bigger. We get in close, above, and behind. We might be able to shake him loose. Make it impossible for him to hold his course. It was the most insane, reckless thing she had ever heard. It defied every regulation, every safety protocol. It was a stunt from a bygone era. She looked at the smug face of the Russian pilot, then at the empty, silent sky around her. They were out of choices. Grandpa's war had come calling. Okay, Dave, she said, her voice low. Hang on. This is gonna get bumpy. She took a deep breath, pushed the throttles, and began to climb. The F-15 responded, angling toward the turbulent air behind the Blackjack's massive wings. Becky pushed the throttles forward. The F-15 climbed, its nose angling toward the spot just above and behind the Blackjack's massive left wing. The air around the Russian bomber was visibly disturbed, a shimmering river of turbulent air. The first bump was a gentle nudge. The second was a hard jolt that slammed her helmet against the canopy. The jet shuddered violently, the airframe groaning like a living thing. It was like driving a car over a washboard road at top speed. Whoa, Nellie. Dave's voice was strained in the headset. You sure about this, Becky? Nope, she grunted, her hands fighting the stick as it tried to wrestle itself from her grip. Her shoulders ached from the effort of holding the jet steady. She edged closer. The roar of their own engines was drowned out by the deafening, chaotic blast of wind screaming off the Blackjack's wings. The turbulence was a physical force, hammering the smaller fighter. Warning lights she'd never seen before flickered to life on her few working instruments. A low, ominous bong echoed through the cockpit, a stress alert. We're pushing the airframe past limits, Dave reported, his voice tight. Mark's gonna have a heart attack. Let him bill me, Becky muttered through clenched teeth. She focused on a single rivet line on the Blackjack's fuselage, using it as a guide to hold position. Her entire world narrowed to that one point, the feel of the stick and the violent shaking. She could see the Russian bomber begin to react. Its huge frame started to quiver, then buck. It dipped a wing, then corrected sharply, its flight path becoming erratic. She had flown into the sweet spot, where her jet's wake was most disruptive. It's working, Dave said, a note of awe in his voice. He's fighting it. The Blackjack's nose yawed left, then right. It was no longer a proud predator, but a stumbling giant. The Russian pilot fought for control, but the constant, brutal buffeting was too much. The massive jet began a slow, unwilling descent, forced down by the relentless turbulence. Becky held her position, a predator herding its prey. The F-15 shuddered like a thing possessed, every rivet and seam protesting the abuse. Becky's arms burned with the effort of holding the stick, her shoulders screaming. Through the canopy, she watched the massive Blackjack struggle. It was no longer a sleek predator, but a wounded beast, its flight path growing increasingly erratic. It dipped a wing, then overcorrected, yawing sharply to the right. The turbulent wake from her jet was a relentless, invisible hammer, beating against its control surfaces. The Russian pilot was fighting back, but he was fighting physics itself. He's losing it, Dave's voice came through, tense but clear. He can't hold altitude. The Blackjack's nose began to drop. It was a subtle change at first, then undeniable. The giant bomber was being pushed down, forced into a gradual but steady descent. The smirk was gone from the pilot's face now, replaced by a mask of intense concentration and frustration. Becky held her position, a Ghost Rider locked onto her target. She didn't let up, maintaining the pressure, her own jet bucking and groaning in the chaotic air. She was flying purely on instinct, feeling the feedback through the stick, making tiny adjustments to stay in the perfect spot of maximum disruption. Finally, the Blackjack's pilot conceded. The aircraft banked away, turning its nose definitively from its original course. The move was slow, clumsy, defeated. He was turning back. A slow breath escaped Becky's lips, a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The pressure in her chest eased just a fraction. "That's it," Dave said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "He's breaking off. Now let's make sure he doesn't change his mind." Becky relaxed her grip on the stick, letting the F-15 drift back from the turbulent wake. The sudden relative silence was jarring. She slid into a position off the Blackjack's wingtip, a visible escort ensuring the turn became a retreat. The two bears, seeing their leader capitulate, began their own slow, wide turns to follow. The sudden quiet was almost deafening. As Becky eased back from the Blackjack's turbulent wake, the violent shuddering of her own jet ceased, replaced by the steady, familiar roar of the engines. The Russian bomber, now flying straight and level, had turned onto a new heading, away from the border. But the job wasn't done. Becky nudged the stick, sliding Old Crow 2 into a position just off the Blackjack's left wingtip. Close enough to be a constant, looming presence in the Russian pilot's field of vision. A visible escort. A reminder. "Let's not give him any ideas about changing his mind," she said, her voice raspy from tension and dry air. "Roger that," Dave replied from the back. "Fuel's looking a little skinny, Becky. We're burning through it faster than expected." She glanced at the gauge. The needle was edging toward the red. The aggressive maneuvering had cost them. They were on borrowed time and borrowed fumes. "We stay until we're relieved or until we're gliding," she said, her eyes fixed on the Blackjack. "They don't get to turn back around." Minutes stretched, measured in the slow, steady drain of fuel. The formation flew on, a strange, silent procession through the empty Arctic sky, a defeated bomber and its relentless, unwanted shadow. The two bears fell in behind their leader, their earlier swagger gone. Then, a miracle. A crackle, then a voice, faint but clear, broke through the static in her headset. "Old Crow 2, this is Canuck 1. We have you visual. Looks like you've got things well in hand." Becky's head snapped up. Two Canadian CF-18s slid into view, taking up positions on the other side of the Russian formation. Their presence was calm, professional, and incredibly welcome. "Took you guys long enough," Dave said, the relief palpable in his voice. "Had to stop for Timbits," the Canadian pilot replied, his voice dry. "We have the bandits. You are clear to disengage. Good work." Becky gave the Canadian lead a wing rock in acknowledgement. She pulled back on the stick, peeling away from the formation. The Russians, now flanked by fresh escorts, continued their journey away from the border. She turned Old Crow 2 toward home, the fuel warning light now glowing a steady, urgent red. The landing gear touched down with a shriek of protest, the jet settling onto the battered runway. Becky guided the F-15 with a delicate touch, every ounce of her focus on conserving their last precious drops of fuel. The engine spooled down with a tired sigh as she rolled to a stop near the hangar. The sudden silence was a physical relief. She unsealed the canopy, the Arctic air washing over her like a bucket of cold water. Her hands trembled slightly as she unbuckled her harness, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. Below, she saw Colonel O'Malley storming across the tarmac, his face a thundercloud. Dave was already climbing out of the back, moving stiffly. O'Malley reached the ladder as Becky stood up in the cockpit. He planted his hands on his hips, his breath puffing in the cold air. "Collins, what in the name of Sam Hill did you do to my aircraft?" he bellowed, his voice cutting through the quiet. "The entire underside is iced over. I've got stress alarms going off that haven't been triggered since the Cold War." Becky just looked down at him, too tired for excuses. She started descending the ladder, her legs feeling like rubber. Before she could speak, O'Malley's eyes flicked past her, taking in the battered state of Old Crow 2, the ice shearing off the wings, the sheer evidence of the battle she'd just flown. His furious expression faltered. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something else, a deep, weary understanding. He shook his head slowly, a grudging, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Now get to my office in 1 hour." "And Collins?" "The whole report." He turned and walked away without another word. Dave clapped a hand on her shoulder. "I think we're still alive." As they walked toward the debrief, Becky saw Sergeant Marcus Jones standing by the hangar door, staring at his jet. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on a specific stress mark on the wing root. He reached out, not touching it, just pointing. Then his gaze shifted to her. He gave a single, slow, approving nod. It was the only medal she needed. The debrief was over. The report, a sanitized version of Chaos and Instinct, was filed. Becky walked out of the command building, the cold air feeling clean after the stuffy office. The sky was clear now, the pale sun offering little warmth. She made her way toward the hangar, drawn by a need to see her jet. Old Crow 2 sat where they'd left her, surrounded by maintenance crews. She looked tired, her underside still caked in ice from the blackjack's wake, new marks scuffed into her paint. Sergeant Marcus Jones stood apart from the others, his arms crossed, silently studying the left wing route. He heard her approach but didn't turn. Becky stopped a few feet away, following his gaze to a faint, new stress line in the metal. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of generators and the wind whistling across the tundra. Jones finally moved. He uncrossed his arms, stepped closer to the wing, and pointed a single, grease-stained finger at the mark. Not accusingly, almost reverently. He then turned his head and looked directly at her. His usual granite expression was unchanged, but his eyes held a new, deep respect. He gave one slow, firm nod. It wasn't a smile. It was better. It was approval from a man who rarely gave it. Becky felt a warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the lingering chill of the flight. She nodded back, just once. No words were needed. He understood the cost. She understood his pride. She reached out and placed her hand flat against the cold skin of the fuselage, right below the nose art, the painted P-51 Mustang named Old Crow. "Thanks, Grandpa," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the jet to the care of the only man she trusted with it. Her steps were lighter, the weight of the day finally lifting. She had brought the plane back. She had brought herself back. And for now, that was enough. The story ends not with a medal ceremony or a speech, but with a silent exchange of respect between a pilot and her crew chief, the highest honor in aviation. It confirms that Becky's worth is measured not by commendations, but by the respect of those who know what it truly takes to fly and fight. The legacy continues quietly. Honor her mission with a like and subscribe. Keep our stories flying high.